You walk into a room, and before anyone says a single word, you already know from the way. A chair is pushed in from the pace of footsteps, down the hallway from a slightly too long pause. Before someone answers a simple question, something is off. You couldn't explain exactly how you know. You just do. Most people call this a gut feeling, but for you, it isn't occasional, it's constant. You do this everywhere, in meetings, at dinner, in a phone call that's only 30 seconds old. Some part of you is always checking the emotional temperature of the room before you even decide what to say next. It feels like intuition. It might actually be something else entirely. It might be a skill you built a long time ago in a much smaller house when reading the weather correctly wasn't a gift. It was survival. There's a particular kind of childhood that doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. No single terrible event, no obvious crisis, just a home where the emotional climate could change without warning. One day, everything is fine. The next, the same small mistake that went unnoticed yesterday suddenly triggers anger, or silence, or a coldness that fills the whole house. Nothing about the child changed. The weather simply shifted, and nobody explained why. The child is immersed in an unpredictable environment. A clinical psychologist explains maybe their parent is sometimes in a good mood and then, out of the blue, becomes enraged. For a child living inside that pattern, there is no way to relax into safety because safety was never guaranteed. It had to be predicted. So the child's mind adapts. It starts doing something remarkable, something most children never consciously choose to do. It becomes a forecaster. P psychological explanation. Here's what makes this pattern easy to overlook. Well, into adulthood, it doesn't feel like fear, it feels like awareness. A child raised in unpredictability learns to notice details. Most people would never register the exact sound of a car door, the rhythm of footsteps on stairs, the specific quality of a silence. That means something is wrong before anyone has said a word. This isn't paranoia, it's adaptation. Children are remarkably adaptive. And when the environment is unpredictable, they develop strategies to maximize safety and minimize threat. Strategy that are intelligent responses to difficult circumstances, the forecasting system develops. Because a child's nervous system is trying to solve an impossible problem. How do I stay safe in a world where safety has no clear rules? The answer the brain settles on is constant monitoring. If the danger can't be prevented, at least it can be predicted, and prediction buys a few precious seconds to prepare, to adjust, okay, to disappear into the wallpaper. Before the storm arrives, our brains develop in a way that responds to the environment we're raised in. So a child in an unpredictable home learns to scan for trouble early and never quite files the skill away. The forecasting doesn't end when the child grows up and leaves the house. The radar was built to run continuously. Nobody ever taught it how to switch off real life pattern in a skill. You can usually spot out this pattern most clearly in the moments that seem on the surface completely unremarkable. A colleague walks past your desk without saying good morning, and within seconds, you're mentally reviewing yesterday's emails, searching for what you might have done wrong. A partner goes quiet during dinner, and although nothing was said, you've already started composing an apology for something you can't even name yet. Someone you love goes quiet, and within about 90 seconds, you've decided it's your fault and started drafting the apology. This isn't overreaction, it's a forecasting instinct doing exactly what it was trained to do, treating a stranger's neutral silence the way it once had to treat a parent's warning silence, because back then missing the signal came at a real cost. Notice too how this shows up in the way you manage other people's emotions. This one is the heavyweight. And it's exhausting when you were small. Another person's mood was your problem, full stop, because it decided what your whole evening looked like. So you learn to treat other people's feelings as tasks assigned to you. Fix, soothe, smooth, manage as an adult. This often gets praised. Coworkers might describe you as remarkably perceptive. Partners often describe this kind of person as attentive, thoughtful, the kind who notices when something's off before a word has been spoken, and it's received as a compliment nobody realizes. The compliment is describing a coping mechanism. Researchers who study childhood development have given this pattern a specific name: hypervigilance, one of the key factors. Contributing to the development of hypervigilance is the presence of emotionally reactive or critical parental figures during childhood, and crucially, this isn't limited to homes with obvious chaos or visible conflict. Quiet unpredictability can shape a developing nervous system just as powerfully as loud unpredictability. A published in the journal Depression and Anxiety found something worth sitting with. People who had unpredictable childhoods were statistically more at risk of experiencing anxiety and depression in adulthood, not simply because something bad happened to them, but because their nervous system spent years in a state of low grade emergency waiting for the next shift in the weather. This is also why routine and predictability matter so much for children's emotional development. Even in small, ignite, seemingly minor ways, research on children's emotional development has found that predictability in daily routines, such as consistent bedtimes at the same hour every night, can be more important for emotional regulation than the total amount of sleep itself. It isn't the specific rule that regulates a child's nervous system, it's the certainty that the rule will hold. When that certainty never arrives, the mind builds something instead, not calm, vigilance, deeper revelation. Here is the part that reframes almost everything. The forecasting system was never really about predicting the other person, it was about protecting the child. This creates a charged cluster of memories, emotions, and patterns, dot organized around the theme of parental unpredictability. And when it is triggered in adulthood by a boss's mood shift, a partner's irritation, any hint of disapproval, the person doesn't just feel uncomfortable, they are transported back to the original moment, reacting as if they were still a helpless child, dependent on an unstable caregiver. This explains something many adults find genuinely confusing about themselves. Why a mild, forgettable moment, a short text reply, a flat tone of voice can trigger a reaction that feels wildly out of proportion to the actual event. It isn't out of proportion at all. Once you understand what's really being measured, the nervous system isn't responding to the text message, it's responding to every unpredictable moment that text message unconsciously resembles. And there's a quieter, stranger consequence of all this forecasting. Early unpredictability reshapes what the nervous system codes as safe versus dangerous. The threshold shifts. So that safety stops meaning a partner who treats someone well and starts meaning a partner whose next move can be predicted. These are not the same thing. But to a mind trained on unpredictability, a predictable pattern, even an unhealthy one, can feel more like home than genuine warmth ever did. Practical understanding. In daily life, this often looks less like fear and more like fatigue. It looks like walking into any room, a meeting, a family gathering, a friend's apartment, and immediately, automatically, running a silent scan. Who seems tense? Who seems fine? What do I need to adjust to keep this smooth? Not because You were asked to because your mind never learned another way. To enter a room, rest for the hypervigilant feels less like a right and more like a gap in surveillance. Even quiet, safe moments can feel oddly uncomfortable because stillness was never something the nervous system learned to trust. Something might still be coming, better to keep scanning. Just in case, understanding this doesn't mean the scanning disappears overnight, but it does change what scanning means. It isn't evidence that something is currently wrong with you, or with the room, or with the relationship. It's evidence of a very old system built by a much younger version of you, still running its original programming in a world that may no longer require it. You've spent years wondering why you can sense tension before anyone else in the room notices it, or why silence from someone you care about feels louder than words. This is likely why it was never about being overly sensitive or dramatic or too much. As you may have been told, walking on eggshells is a type of chronic stress response that stays switched on. And one of its long lasting effects is that a parent's emotions became the truth. For the child living inside them, you built an extraordinary skill under difficult conditions. You can. A child should never have to forecast the emotional weather of their own home, but you did. And you did it well enough to survive it, well enough that the skill followed you long after the original storm ended. That isn't a flaw, it's evidence of exactly how adaptable a young mind can be when safety isn't guaranteed. Meaningful conclusion. The room you're scanning right now probably isn't dangerous, but some part of your mind hasn't fully received that update because it was trained in a different room at a different time, under different rules. It learned that noticing everything always was the only way to stay one step ahead of the weather. That part of you isn't broken. It's loyal. It's still doing the job it was given decades ago, faithfully, exhaustingly, without ever being told. The storm has passed. You don't have to fire the forecaster completely, but you're allowed to gently tell it something it never got to hear as a child. You can rest. Now you did the job, you did it well, and this room, this time, is actually safe.